Welcome to episode 21 of the Ukuvusa radio podcast. This is Dr. Z, your favorite Swazi Carolinian, and today's guest is Kathryn Hubert, who is the owner of Chez Genese. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Genese.
Genese.
Yes.
Chez Genese, which is a French-inspired restaurant in downtown Greensboro on Elm Street, right across the street from Mellow Mushroom. You'll learn in this episode that Kathryn's business model, her vision for the restaurant, there's so many things that stand out to me, Kathryn, about what you've done differently with Chez Genese. And so I really, really want our listeners to be able to learn from you about authenticity in leadership, authenticity and creativity in entrepreneurship. And for those who are just listening in for the first time, the word Ukuvusa means to awaken. And so all of our guests here are speaking with us about some aspect of human awakening. And so I'm just really, really pleased, honored to have you here as a guest. How's it going this morning?
It's going well. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. So I just want to pass it over to you, just so everyone knows. The first time that I encountered Kathryn was at a Stories of Us event. I think it's been at least a year and a half. Do you remember when that took place?
I'm trying to remember if it was at the beginning of 2020. It might have been the beginning of 2020 or the end of 2019.
Okay.
But yeah. It's been over a year.
Yeah. Well, I was just telling somebody yesterday that my sense of time since the pandemic is just so janky. There are things that happened a year ago. I'm like, oh, it may have been 3 years now.
Yep.
It just felt longer. But our friend, colleague, fellow community person, Lyndon Rigo, who leads CoMeta, he hosted events, and I think he may still be hosting them virtually now. But in that event, Kathryn was among a group of panelists who spoke about, your story. And so I've been thinking about you a lot since then, because I'm always listening to people who are like brave enough to pursue things in a different way than what they've seen. People who are able to bring different people together to get things done. I mean, there just were so many things that were super impressive. And then even more so, that you're still in operation after so many small businesses in Greensboro and beyond have suffered a great deal because of the pandemic. You all have managed to remain agile and continue to shift things around in order to keep things moving. So why don't you go ahead and just start sharing with us what your story is and how we ended up here today?
Sure. There's a lot of background and pieces, I think, that were involved in getting this restaurant started. Big one being that I have 3 cousins with autism. And so autism has been part of my family and growing up and experience, and has had a huge impact on my heart and on my life. And my cousins are a big inspiration behind the restaurant seeking to employ adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, which is a huge part of our existence and the reason why we are around. But then as far as actually turning that into a restaurant, the idea into a restaurant, I have loved food for my entire life. That's been
as have I, Kathryn.
Right.
As have I.
I have pictures of me cooking with my mom when I was 2 and 3 years old. I just have always been fascinated by food, and so much of my thought process in the day and what I'm excited about has to do with mealtime. My mom stopped taking me on field trips as a kid because the only thing I cared about was my snacks. So it was that was the highlight for me. And that stayed consistent. I mean, that's been always a part of my life. And mealtime was always a really big priority in my family and our family gathering around the table. And there was so much life and conversation that happened there. And I really, I think, began to fall in love with the process of cooking when I was in high school. And the kitchen became a creative outlet for me and a place to play and have a break from my homework and my studies. And it also became a really real and tangible way to care for or show love to people in my life. And so that kind of took place, I think, for the better part of high school, just really getting more comfortable with cooking, and that became a little bit more of an art form, I think, for me, and a way to express myself. And like most, I think, high schoolers, as I was getting ready to graduate, I was like, what am I going to do with my life?
And were you in Greensboro?
I was in Boone. I grew up.
Okay.
I was born in Southern California, but grew up mostly in Boone.
Oh, okay.
So mountain girl for the most part.
Yeah.
And I was contemplating what to do after high school and what to study in college. And my dad was the one actually who was like, you really do love cooking and you sort of have a natural bend towards it.
Yeah.
So maybe that could be an option, which is what I ended up doing. And I went to community college and I got my associates in culinary. And that was a good next step for me. It also gave me the opportunity to work in restaurants while I was in school, which is where I learned the most anyways, is kind of hands-on, day in, day out. You do lots of practice and very tactile when it comes to learning. So that's where I felt like I really grew as far as skills and understanding of what cooking was. And then got the opportunity to move to France for a year after I graduated with my associates, and lived in the Burgundy region of France and cooked.
Was that like a school-related thing? How did you end up in France?
It wasn't. It actually, I worked at a conference retreat center for European missionaries, and my mom had visited that retreat center before, like, she married my dad. She had lived in Germany for a year and ended up going to this retreat center in France.
Wow.
And so she was like, there was a cook there when I was there like 25, 30 years ago. Maybe they still need a cook.
Yeah.
You could reach out. And so it's kind of like, she had some old contacts that then I reached out to, and I basically sent an email and was like, I've been studying culinary and I would love to maybe come cook for you if you need someone. And they emailed me back within like a day and said, we'd love to have you come. And then,
wow, was it a job or were you volunteering?
I volunteered.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah, it took about a year to actually like get all my paperwork and my visa and save some money and all of that. But then moved to France for a year.
Wow.
And cooked at this conference retreat center in the Burgundy region of France, and totally fell in love with French food and culture.
Was there someone there to teach you how to cook French food? Or were you YouTubing it?
Yeah, no, it was just kind of like, a lot of it was by eating a lot of French food and going to people's homes and seeing how they did things. And then just kind of studying some on my own and practicing. And a little bit of that I'd already done in cooking school, because French food is such a foundation for cooking in a lot of other parts of the world. It's a big part of formal cooking training.
Yeah.
So I had a little bit of a foundation, but really just loved the way that the French people view hospitality and food. There's a lot of time put into preparing meals because they also spend a lot of time eating their meals. And it's an event and it's something that they celebrate. And there's just such a like a cultural perspective and mindset of food being something that's beautiful and wonderful, and like the simple pleasures in life, and really taking time to enjoy them. And I just loved it. Like if someone invited you into their home, they had nothing else planned to do the rest of the day. It was like
cook all day.
Yeah, you're here.
Wow.
You're in my house. You can be here as long as you want to. This meal will last for 4 hours. Like it just was such a spirit of generosity towards hospitality. And it took a little bit of getting used to, coming from such a like time oriented.
Right, because we are not that way.
It's like, you may have 45 minutes of my time and then I'm leaving.
Right.
So it took some time getting used to that, but then I just loved it.
Yeah.
and moved back from France, ended up transferring into UNCG, which is what brought me to Greensboro. So went from France to Greensboro, which was like, it was a little bit of culture shock.
Just a touch. What year was this?
2010, I think.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I've been in Greensboro for about, 10 years now, a little over. And did hospitality and tourism management at UNCG and was there for a couple years and really wasn't planning to stay in Greensboro. I was kind of like, I'm gonna graduate and I'm gonna move somewhere cool and I'm gonna help people. Thinking like, I'll move out west, I'll move to like Oregon or I don't know.
And at that point, Kathryn, were you already thinking about opening a restaurant or was that not?
That wasn't on my radar at all.
Wow.
And it was through kind of my second and last year at UNCG and this idea of like, I'm going to go someplace and help people, that I felt challenged on that and recognized that I had this great idea of going somewhere else and helping people, but that there were a lot of people that surrounded me here in Greensboro that needed help or needed relationship and connection, and that I was doing nothing to actually push towards that. So I was like, do I really expect that like I'm going to move somewhere else and all of a sudden that's going to become my heartbeat if I'm not already and willing to do that where I'm at?
Wow, that's a big statement. Yeah. So wait a minute. Tell us a little bit about how did you know that? How did you know that there were people who were craving connection and relationship here? Were people saying that to you explicitly or were you just kind of perceiving it or what?
Just perceiving it. And I lived really close to downtown when I was a student. And so I saw a lot of people walk by my apartment every day and people would stop me and ask me for things sometimes or ask me for help or for money or for food. And so just being aware, like there's a lot of people in my community who have a need in some capacity.
Yeah.
And I'm doing very little to actually meet those needs. So why would moving to a new city all of a sudden change that for me?
Yeah. That's a great point.
So at that point, the plan was kind of like, all right, you're going to start investing where you're at and you're going to start getting involved in community here. And through that process, I just really fell in love with Greensboro and realized like I do love the neighborhoods here and I do love the community feel and presence and love the diversity. And so then I was like, well, maybe I'll stay a little bit longer. And I think it was really like I ended up working in the school system in special education for a couple years after I graduated. And it was really in those couple of years that the idea for the restaurant kind of came.
Okay, so you're saying you graduated from UNCG with the hospitality degree, and then after that you started teaching with GCS, Guilford County Schools? Oh, okay.
So I worked with the Autism Society of North Carolina while I was a student at UNCG.
Okay.
And then that job connection ended up leading to a job in the Guilford County school system for a couple of years after I graduated. And I think it was in those couple of years of working in the school system that I was daydreaming one day about like, if I could have any job in the world, what would it be? And truly like almost instantly thought I would start up a restaurant that gave people either a first chance or a second opportunity. And it was broad at the beginning. It was like, oh, I could work with people with disabilities. I could work with the homeless population. I could work with ex-offenders. Like trying to think of all the different realms that I was aware of that have trouble entering into the workforce or staying into the workforce. And then it really stayed like a daydream for probably almost a year. I'm a slow mover, so I had to learn to be faster about some things. and just kind of mold that around and would talk about it with some friends or family. And I think after about a year was like, maybe this is more than a daydream. Like I've been chewing on it for a little while now. And so started to kind of hone down a little bit more specifically to, I think I want to work with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and really focus on that. And then that became, okay, if this is what I want to do, what do I need to do in order to make that happen?
Yeah.
Which launched really another like 4 or 5 years of pursuing other work experience, getting connected in the community, saving money, writing a business plan, up until the point of really the like year before the restaurant opened was I worked full time on developing the concept, interviewing managers, talking to as many people as I possibly could about what I wanted to do and getting other people on board and involved. And then we opened just a little over 2 years ago. Our 2-year anniversary was back in October. So
Oh, wow.
we're not even quite 2.5 years old.
Yeah.
Baby
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
It's just tiny.
Yeah. Well, so how did you learn about the business side of things? I've worked like in a restaurant, and then my sister worked for a long time for a really large restaurant down in Atlanta. So I know, there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of factors there. How did you learn about all of that?
There are some of it I've definitely learned on the job with Chez Genese. The job that I had prior to that, I worked with a restaurant group, and when I interviewed said, like, this is what I'm hoping to do someday, and I'm looking for experience to help get me there.
Yeah.
Like, what can I do? I was like, I'll do anything here that you need me to, but ultimately, like, this is where I'm going, and I'm seeking out the skill set that I would need to help me do that. And so my boss was very generous in setting me up with experiences and roles and responsibilities that helped cultivate that and give me the opportunities that I needed in order to at least feel like I had somewhat of a handle or grasp on what I needed to do, even though a lot of it has still obviously had to be learned as I go.
And can I ask which restaurant it was? Was it here in Greensboro?
It was. I worked with Fresh Local Good Food Group, which is kind of the parent company that was over the Iron Hen Cafe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Off of Wendover?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Got you.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, so I'm going on to the next question.
Go for it.
Okay. So everything that I'm looking at that talks about the future of the global economy, talks about how a lot of things are being automated, and that entrepreneurship is really the future, and that a lot of jobs that exist now won't exist in the future, and that if our students in these 7 colleges and universities aren't learning entrepreneurial skills, that they really are going to be in trouble. So what are your thoughts about entrepreneurship in the future?
I certainly hope that that's the wave of the future. I think there's a lot that's complicated about entrepreneurship. There's a lot that's really beautiful and exhilarating about it too. But I think one of the qualities that I admire is just the stick-to-itiveness that you need to have in order to be an entrepreneur, and a willingness to adapt and to change and to really listen, I think, to the people around you. And so I hope that that's the society that we're moving into, is like you spend time looking at your community or your culture, and you see where there are gaps, or you see where needs need to be met, and you're willing to create something that would fill those spaces. That's a big part. People ask, like, why the restaurant looks the way that it does, or why is it French food? And it's like, honestly, I mean, that does tie into the concept that we have. But a big part of it, too, is, like, I wanted to create a space that I would want to be in, and some place that I felt like was missing in our community. And it's like, we have a lack of cozy spaces where people can meet and connect and have conversation and let life really intersect and meet up and have the opportunity to change and shift just because you've met somebody else. And so I was like, all right, well then I want to create a space that would help fill that need. And obviously we could use a lot more of them, I think, in Greensboro, but I would say that gives me hope, like the idea that we would move more into like more creative, community-oriented businesses and business owners would be exciting.
Yeah, it would. Like, I mean, I just love that because, again, you know, I'm a product of Greensboro and have gone through a lot of the colleges and universities at Guilford College. I've worked or been on staff or faculty in all of them, except Elon and Well, no, I have taught at Greensboro College,
Okay.
but Elon, I've had 2 interns now from Elon, you know?
Yeah.
And one thing that I've noticed is it's hard the way that people are educated in the formal higher ed system. There isn't enough encouragement about creativity. You know what I mean? And there are kind of regimented ways of going about things as opposed to what you and I talked about before we started recording, like having a group of people, bouncing ideas, and then trying something that you may not have seen before. So I really dig that.
Yeah, and I think like nothing in business is ever truly guaranteed.
Right.
Like things shift so quickly, and I feel like COVID-19 is a great example of that. Of people who sat down with me prior to the pandemic and would ask like, well, what does it feel like to be a successful business? And I was like, A, we're a year old, so you're a little premature on that question. But B, like, it could literally change overnight. Like, I can't guarantee that because we had a line of people at our door today that we will tomorrow. And that has proved to be true. Like, so much has changed and life looks so different. And if you are set in this has to be this way, you won't survive. Like, you have to be willing to kind of take the punches and figure out how to grow and adapt in that process.
Yeah. Do you still cook now?
I do.
Yeah?
Yeah.
At the restaurant?
I do.
Yeah.
I do less now than I did when we first started. When we first started, I was in the kitchen every day.
Yeah.
And then as time has gone on, I've worked to build up and train up our staff a little bit more so that I can step out of the kitchen. But I do still have 3 to 4 days a week where I'm in the kitchen and actually working with food.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's cool too, that you still enjoy it. I've heard of people who like had a hobby, let's say they love baking, but then they try to go entrepreneurial with it, then they hate baking, you know? Yeah, so that's cool that you still like it. Tell our listeners tell us more about your business model, your staff, the significance of the choice that you did ultimately make in terms of the population that you wanted to serve, and then we'll get into how to communicate with people who are different from ourselves.
Yeah, so our restaurant is small. We have about 44 seats in the restaurant. We have a staff. The max number of people we've had on staff, I think, is close to 30, and we're more at like 24 people at the moment. So small team, small space, which I like. I like the family feel that provides. But we are set up as a business. We do French-inspired food. A big part of what we do is that we employ adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Just over 50% of our staff. So it was really important to me as we got started that we were an inclusive work environment, because the idea, right, is that you're pulling people together from different backgrounds and different experiences, and you're learning and you're growing together.
Yeah.
And because I wanted this restaurant to be set up as a stepping stone. So if this is the first job you were able to get, or this is the first job that you got in the restaurant industry, which was the case for the majority of the people on my staff, that you could use this as an opportunity to gain skills and then move on to something else, and that you'd be set up well to do that. And we felt like an inclusive work environment was the best model to achieve that. So I've told all of my staff, like when they were being hired, I was like, if you are not willing to work hard and you're not willing to give me your best, then this is not going to be the job for you. Like, you don't have to have any restaurant experience. You don't have to have the skills coming in. I'm willing to teach you that and to equip you, but you have to meet me in that. Like, you're going to have to give it your best and you're going to have to work hard. And they do. I mean, I am really, really proud of my team, but that was laid into the foundation, and is a big part of who we are. And it was important to me that we were set up as a business and not as a nonprofit, because I feel like that sets a different tone for my staff and also for the general public.
Right.
That as a business owner, I am hiring you because I think you are the best and the smartest decision for my business to be successful.
Right.
This is not, you're not getting a job out of pity. You're not getting a job because I'm just benevolent and this is a charity. Like, I'm giving you a job because I think you're going to be an outstanding employee and I think you're going to be what makes my business work. And I need you. And I think that communicates such a different level of respect, and also speaks to the self-worth of the person that's being hired. And I think that that can do incredible things for someone's confidence and allows a space for the abilities that they already have to really come out and to shine. And that was the hope, that we would create an environment where people could thrive and they love coming to work. And when you love coming to work, you're going to give it your best because you like being there.
Yeah.
So that's been a big part of us getting started and wanting to communicate that to our community too. And that's a process. Like, we're still only, I would say, scratching the surface of that, because we still do get a lot of questions, or people wanting to place like, oh, like what you're doing is such a good thing. And that's not where we want the focus to be. The focus is really on the feel and the heart that you experience when you're inside the restaurant, and an opportunity to have your perspective shifted.
Yeah. So speaking of shifting perspectives, what lessons can you share with us about how to communicate with people who are different from ourselves? There are folks who I know, myself included, who I wasn't raised around people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. And were it not modeled by other people around me. And, I have a friend who works with high-functioning autistic adults, and so I've learned a lot through my relationship with him. What lessons would you give to those of us who are like completely ignorant?
I think the first lesson, or what I usually tell people, is to acknowledge the human that's in front of you. And as simple as that sounds, I feel like that's the step that usually gets missed. And recognizing, like, there may be some ways that we're different, but you're a human and I'm a human, and we have many more things in common than we do have things that are different. And going back to that point and thinking about, like, okay, if this were me, like, how would I want someone to treat me, or how would I want someone to talk to me? And being willing to engage in education and asking people, like, I don't know what's the best thing to do here. Like, can you teach me? And being willing to learn. Like, it was a game changer for me when I realized that someone with autism doesn't need to make eye contact in order to understand or to listen what someone is saying to them. And I think we can get hung up on that. Like, you're not looking at me. I'm talking to you. Look at me. And it's like, that can actually make the concentration harder instead of being able to acknowledge, like, you don't, in this situation, like, you don't actually need to look at me in order to hear what I'm saying. And you'll actually hear me better if you're not looking at me. And I'm okay with sitting in something that feels maybe culturally different or a little bit awkward to acknowledge that this is what's going to function best for both of us right now.
Yeah.
So just being willing to get to know people and to hear their own stories and to hear their experiences and hear what we spent a lot of time when we interviewed staff, like what are things that make you happy? Like, what are things that make you stressed? And then being able to put that into practice in a work setting has made a big difference in just getting to know kind of how people tick, which I feel like that should be common practice regardless of disability or not, like, but we don't spend a lot of time actually getting to know people and kind of investing in them. So that's, I think, the starting point is just, you're a human, I'm a human. We have a lot more in common than things that we may have that are different. And can I get to know you and what your experiences are and how can we form relationship? And then just on a practical level, I think direct communication is something that I found to not only be helpful, but wanted. And it's so refreshing. I love that. Like, I love the ability to be direct and to receive direct feedback and to not be intimidated by that transparency and that honesty, but to really celebrate it instead. And recognize that sometimes, right, like in autism or other intellectual and developmental disabilities, there's some of the social norms that aren't as intuitive. And that can also sometimes feel awkward, but it's really helped me to recognize, like, your natural response here is what my natural response would be if I didn't feel societal shame or pressure to be a certain way. So it's like, you might be wanting to, like, scream right now. I would also really like to scream right now, but there's something in me that says that I can't do that. And recognizing, like, we're not different in the way that we are feeling at the core. I just have all these other layers of things that are holding me back from expressing it in its raw form. And still taking time to teach, like, boundaries and strategies and how to manage stress and all of that. That is an important part of existing in the world, but not being thrown off by, like, I think the pureness and the innocence that I see a lot of times in individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and just, like, this is what I'm feeling or thinking in its true form, and being willing to embrace that and recognize it for what it is.
Yeah. Gosh, so much of what you're talking about, they're principles just for humans, you know?
Yeah.
Like, as you're describing, you know, sitting and really getting to know people, seeing the humanity in people first. I was just doing a virtual workshop yesterday with the Alamance Workforce Council, and it was about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, you know, in my professional former life, I taught conflict resolution, interpersonal communication. It's the same principles, you know? And I mean, as we all know, we're living in this time of social unrest and all these divisions, whether they're racial or gender divisions. And again, like, I'm listening to you and I'm like, yeah, wow, if we could just all just take a breath for a second and do that with each other, all of us, we could go a lot farther. Just my opinion, you know?
Yeah.
And I will say this too, Kathryn. So I did all this research around entrepreneurial startups, and being authentic within that process. The reason I wanted to study authenticity in that process is because, to your point about how, some of us have the freedom to fully express what it is that's happening inside. Others have layers of expectations, social conditioning, whatever you want to call it, that hold things down. So I really wanted to look at 3 different variables within that entrepreneurial startup space. I wanted to see, are there differences in like the freedom to be authentic based on gender, ethnicity, and age. So I looked at, different generations.
Yeah.
And there was so much interesting information that I learned through that process. But ultimately, what I learned is that regardless of whatever your identity is or however you identify, the single most important determining factor in terms of your success meaning retention of employees, the satisfaction of employees, because, like you said, the happier people are, the longer they'll stay, the ability to adjust during times of change. The one factor that transcended all of those different categories was mindset. It was that, all of us have a story. How is it that we're telling the story about ourselves to ourselves? And whatever our challenges are we using those as fuel to keep us going? You know what I mean? So I just wanted to share that with you because, again, you're a woman. How old are you?
I'm 32.
Right, a 32-year-old young woman who is able to do and has been able to do more than many people of your age. And so you've already made it really clear that you've got some principles, you know what I'm saying? Foundational principles that guide the decisions that you make, the way that you move about in the world. So I just wanted to lift that up.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating and makes so much sense that you have to have something that's grounding you that you go back to and that you're going to need to go back to over and over again. And if that's not there, then you do feel really lost, I think, in what your purpose is or what you're doing. And or it becomes easy to have too many purposes or too many different things that you're trying to serve. And so having to focus in, that was, in getting this started, I was like, I can't physically or emotionally be everything to everybody in this restaurant, staff or guests. And so my focus became my managers. It was like, I'm going to pour into and invest into these 6 people. So that they can pour into and invest into our staff. And then our staff can pour into it and invest into our guests. And hopefully that encourages our guests to go out and do that for someone else. And it creates kind of a chain effect of kindness. But it's like, but if me in my own limited self tried to do that with everybody that came in, I would burn out in a heartbeat. Like, I wrestle with burnout just for doing my portion. So it's like, I think it's important knowing like what your part is and also what your limitations are, and not seeing that as a negative, but like really a chance to dive into the space that you have to cultivate. So the next question, which you've already started answering a bit, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs who want to create something unlike anything they've seen before? There's a lot. I think it's easy to have rose-colored glasses a little bit with being an entrepreneur and feel like it's so exciting. You're getting, I hear that a lot. You're getting to live your dream. And it's like living your dream and living the dream are different things. And I think people confuse that. And it's like, I am living my dream. It's been one of the most hard and intense processes of my life. It's also been one of the most fulfilling and rewarding. So I wouldn't change any of it, but it's certainly not for the faint of heart. And I think in order to be an entrepreneur, you have to be willing to find motivation and encouragement within yourself, because sometimes you get that from outside sources, but not enough to really keep you going.
Yeah.
And so it's like you're having to wake up each day and decide what needs to be done and then motivate yourself to actually do it. And you have to believe in what you're doing, because not everybody else will. And I talked to people before starting the restaurant who were not a fan of the idea. And it's like I had to take that and decide, okay, you just told me that my business idea is terrible. Am I going to still stand behind it and say, like, even though you have, like, valid opinions, am I going to let that determine whether or not I'm still going to push into this? And being willing to be like, no, I believe in what I'm doing enough to actually take the risk and keep moving forward, regardless of whether or not I had this person's support or this person's support.
That's huge too.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Which is hard.
It is, especially, I mean, for people whose opinions you respect. And what were some of the things that the naysayers were saying?
This isn't going to make you a ton of money. I'm like, that's not really the point. Like, I think you missed the point when you read my business plan.
Right.
But in the business world, too, it's like, well, why would you want to start something that wasn't going to make you rich?
Because it's transactional, but you're transformational.
Well, thank you. I like that.
Yeah.
I wish that I had thought to say that back at the time. So that was part of it. And I think sometimes I did still get looked at as, like, you're a young woman wanting to start a business, and there being doubts or hesitations around that. I got asked, like, well, do you want to have a family someday? I was like, I don't really think that's your business to ask me that, or that should determine whether or not I can start something else. But
because people will project their limitations onto you and their fears and all that.
So they're, it's kind of like, well, this won't work. You're taking a restaurant's a stressful environment. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities can be sensitive to stressful or overstimulating environments. You're putting those two things together. Like, there's a lot of different things. I think overall, the positive outweighed the negative for sure. And people who actually took time to hear the heart behind it identified with that and were on board. And people who looked at it simply as just a business that this isn't going to make you super rich, or like, well, you shouldn't spend all this time on it. And our numbers worked. Like, it wasn't like, I don't know if people looked at it and thought it would fail altogether. Maybe. Yeah. But it was like, the numbers line up. Like, the way that this is set, it can be sustainable. So I wasn't trying to create something that would be a financial pit. Yeah. But it also wasn't the goal. I was like, restaurants don't make that much money anyways. Like, obviously, if I was wanting to be super wealthy, I wouldn't start a restaurant, like, regardless of what the concept was. But learning how to, like, push past that and be like, no, I still believe in this, and this is what we're going to do. And then I think the other thing, as far as entrepreneurship goes, that's really important is what we touched on already in being willing to take the time to listen and to observe and to see what's missing and what's needed, to observe how other people are doing business and what you like and what you don't like. I would go sit in other spaces and just watch how other people did business, and I would take a notebook with me and I would write down things that I really liked and things that I didn't and wanted to do differently. And that was such a huge part of actually focusing in on, this is exactly what I want this concept to be, and getting into all the details of it, but not rushing that process of, like, observation and listening, but also in that process of listening, knowing what to take in as gold and hold on to and what to throw out as trash. that's important too.
Yeah. Keep the gold, toss the trash.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you take care of yourself?
I like outside of work, outside probably and inside. It's important to do it in both places.
Yeah.
I think that's always a wrestle to figure out how to do that well, and balance looks different in different seasons. It is important to me to acknowledge that the world and my business revolves without me.
Yeah.
I can step away. And I try to be intentional about the time that I pull away from work and intentional with the time that I'm at work. But when the restaurant first started, I worked every day for like the first 3 months, I think. And then I thought, I can't keep doing this. Like, I'm gonna burn out if I do that. So Mondays started becoming my consistent day off. And I protected that day with my life. It was like, I only do things that are restful and helpful to me on those days. I do not engage in work. I do not open my emails. People don't call me. Like, that's my day to actually disconnect from what's going on at work and to just exist outside of it. And so that was huge and really healthy for me. I try to stay physically active and make sure that I'm spending time outside, because I really, being outdoors is just a positive release and re-energizes me and cleans my brain out. And try to make sure that I surround myself with people that bring a lot of joy into my life and that I can talk about hard things with and also like laugh and play games with, and having that balance in my friendships. And I have a dog, and she's been a great thing for me, because that is something that I need to care for and be home for, and I can't leave her too long by herself. So like that does help me set some boundaries there just naturally. And from a work perspective, like having a team of people that are also super invested and care in what's going on. Like, I don't worry when I'm not at the restaurant, because I know that their level of care for it is the level of care that I would have, and they're going to do their very best. And so that is also very freeing and allows me to be able to pull away and not feel like my brain is still at work. But it's an ever growing process of learning how to do self-care, and knowing, again, that looks different in different seasons. And there are some seasons where it's like, no, I need to work a lot more. And then other seasons where it's like, okay, I can allow for some time to really pull back, and I'm going to make the most of that. But
Yeah. So where is Kathryn, and where is Chez Genese in 5 years?
Great question. So my overall hope for the restaurant is that it makes waves in our community and in our world. My ultimate hope is not to see a bunch of businesses have a mission of employing people with disabilities, but just that becomes the social norm of all businesses. So ideally, right, our business model would expire at some point. Like, it wouldn't be needed culturally anymore, because we just hire all kinds of people all the time. Like, that becomes the social norm. It will have like served its purpose, I think, if our world gets to a place where that is the way our world exists. But I don't know how long that will take. So in the meantime, I do really love the idea of the restaurant being what it is and being small, being the only one. And I have a lot of other ways that I would like to see our mission grow in and outside of the restaurant. But one of them is that I was part of starting up an organization last year called Compass Greensboro, which is focusing on navigating adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities through job and life and social skills. And we'll start with a job training program that we're hoping to launch this fall.
Is Compass Greensboro a nonprofit? Is it a program? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's a separate organization from the restaurant, but has a similar heart.
Yeah.
And purpose. But the hope is that the umbrella is set big over that and will eventually include like a housing arm and residential spaces combined with classes and hands-on training for budgeting and what is health insurance and how do you navigate that system, and and grocery shopping and cleaning and cooking and all of that kind of what you need to know in order to live successfully and independently.
I'm like, can you team up with Guilford County Schools?
Yeah, exactly right.
For real, though.
And then also have like a social aspect where you're working on more of your social skills and understanding your own personality and dating and what does it mean to make friends and how do you network and who are your people, like all that kind of stuff. Again, just setting the goal being to set people up to be as independent as they want or can be and feeling really good and confident about that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of coming down the pipeline for myself individually. I'm not totally sure. I have this little like side dream of one day I'm going to live in a little cottage in France again.
Oh, nice.
Which I love, but I also know I would like to think that I would be totally content to just be a little hermit in my cottage in France, but I think that there's such a big part of me that wants to be active and involved in making change and movement. So maybe it'll just be I don't know how that'll look, but I think the dream and the heart that I have for myself really goes back to the basics of like, I love gathering people around tables, and food is a great way to facilitate that and make it happen. But that's where I feel like my most real and my happiest is when I'm getting to make connections and serve people around a table. And so I don't know what that will continue to look like, but I feel like there's so much room in Greensboro in my life to make that happen, and have that look different.
Yeah. We've got like 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that when you were living downtown, are you still living downtown now?
I'm not far from downtown, but I'm more in like the Lindley Park area.
Okay. Well, you were mentioning that when you were living downtown, you noticed needs and there were people who, needed help. So what do you think that downtown Greensboro needs to be focusing on right now in light of that?
Yeah. I think, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, that Greensboro is still figuring out what its identity is. And I think that that's an important step of learning what its focus is too. And so I think that's the first step, is that Greensboro kind of needs to figure out who it is and what its identity is, and then start to live fully out of that.
Do you have any thoughts about what you think Greensboro's identity is?
A little bit. I do, and I think it ties into your question. Like, I think there's there's so much potential here. I love Greensboro.
Greensboro, the city of potential.
It is. But there truly is a lot of diversity in this city. And I think there's an opportunity. I don't think we're there yet. But I think there could be the opportunity in Greensboro for people to truly be who they are and for that to be not just okay, but celebrated. That there's a celebration of just the natural like collaboration and melting pot that Greensboro is, but existing more cohesively in that. And it's like rubbing shoulders, with your neighbors and and like that's what I want to see. Like I want to see Greensboro known around the country for the way that it loves its people.
Yeah.
And I think that there's the potential for Greensboro to be that, but that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in order for that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was, with the Ph.D, my concentration is transformational leadership for civic and community engagement. And we studied a lot of different leadership approaches. Okay. And, most recently I was talking to, a young lady named Brene Brown who leads an organization called Black Voters Matter. And we have teamed up, we being We the People International, we've teamed up with Black Voters Matter to try to increase voter engagement. And one of the things Danielle said on a recent call was that she only wants to work with people who are transformational, not just transactional. And I think that those two concepts can be applied to Greensboro as well, because there is a difference. There's a difference between our Greensboro leaders who focus solely on attracting new businesses, regardless of how the community gets integrated or the relational, challenges that exist. And I really believe that that's a dangerous approach. If we skip over human relationship and connection just for the sake of the dollar, we're gonna hit a wall. And I think we already have. I think a lot of what's happening right now is symptomatic of that. So I like everything you're saying, Kathryn.
Thank you. Back at you.
All right, we have 2 minutes left.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that's, whether people know it or not, that's what we crave.
Yeah.
Right? Is to be seen and to be known and to be loved. And it's like, you might come someplace because you had a good job offer, but you're going to stay and you're going to be engaged and willing to be part of something because of how it makes you feel. And so if you can't separate that out, and you do need both. Like, people do need to have jobs and make money, but you also need to be able to have relationships and good relationships and feel like you're seen in that process. And you're missing out on a big part of the equation if you're focused solely on the data and the numbers. And
do you read any or watch anything from Brene Brown?
Oh, I love Brene Brown.
Yeah. She literally is the reason I even ended up getting a PhD. Before I saw her, I was like not impressed by the air around PhD land. But then when I started listening to her and she talked about concepts like belonging, connection, which have always been desires of my own heart, so that shifted even the way that I approach academics. So yeah. Kathryn, thank you so much for being here. Yeah. Are there any final either words of advice or, 2 to 3 words to describe how you're feeling today? I'll let you choose kind of how you want to close it out.
I think today I do feel encouraged sitting here talking with you, and I've realized like that's one of the things I've missed the most over the past year and walking through a pandemic is just the opportunity to get to meet other people and hear and relate and talk, and you realize that there's so much more to life than just what I'm getting to see or experience at the moment. And that's exciting. Like, it's exciting to know that there are more and more people that live around me, like we live around each other, but haven't really connected before just recently, but have like really similar passions and drives for what we want to see the city become. And that part is encouraging. Like, it's easier to go back and push back into work when you know that there are other people who are doing the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I agree. It's been such a pleasure having this conversation. I hope it's a continuous one.
Agreed.
And I definitely want to stay in touch because I have so many thoughts based on the things that you've shared. But thank you all, listeners, for tuning in. Episode 21. Until next time, peace.